Please welcome to the stage Joel Hellman, Dean of the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University.
Good afternoon and welcome here today. Thank you for joining us on the Symposium on Diplomacy in honor of Madeleine Albright. Thank you to our co-sponsors, the Aspen Ministers Forum of the Aspen Institute. We're heartened to see so many students, friends, former colleagues of Secretary Albright, members of her family, and public servants whose lives she touched. You know, in January, some 5 days before our spring semester was set to begin, Secretary Albright called me, and she told me with a heavy heart that due to the uncertainties of her illness, she wouldn't be able to teach her scheduled course that semester. She apologized for telling me at the very last moment, just before the semester began, but as she said to me, the one thing I tried hardest not to give up was my classroom. This very month, Madeleine Albright would have celebrated her 40th year inside that classroom here at Georgetown and the School of Foreign Service. And though she eventually became known for a lifetime of service at the very apex of U.S. foreign policy, she always insisted that first and foremost, she was a professor. Most professors are content to study the world. Madeleine Albright changed the world. Albright changed the world through the power of her ideas. Throughout her life, she remained deeply committed to the promotion of democracy and human rights, and she worked to put those ideas into practice. After the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union, she helped to shape a new post-Cold War global order anchored by liberal principles. That new global order produced one of the most consequential eras of peace and stability and prosperity the world has ever known, with the highest rates of global poverty reduction, the greatest advances in the well-being of women and children, the lowest levels of conflict in a century, and the deepening of a truly integrated global economy. Madeleine Albright changed the world through the power of her irrepressible personality. She rewrote the rule book of diplomacy by bringing her own extraordinary life story as an immigrant, as a teacher, as a mother, and eventually as a grandmother into the diplomatic toolkit. She combined a scholar's appreciation for the arc of history, an immigrant's belief in the great promise of America, a woman's understanding of what it means to shatter glass ceilings, and an uncanny ability to disarm anyone who dared to underestimate her with wit, with charm, and with grace. She had a war chest of zingers to bring home any point, a famous pin to illustrate every occasion, and a lifetime of stories to illustrate the complexities of security and diplomacy. Finally, Madeleine Albright changed the world by empowering others. She inspired generations of students not only to understand the world, but to serve the world. And her students, so many of whom are here today, went on to do just that, a legacy that is almost incalculable in its reach. Though the obituaries on her passing heralded her impact on the world, I can attest from the hundreds of testimonials of her recent and former students of the impact she had on individuals. Each had a story of how she inspired them to serve. And more often than not, each had a very specific story about how she went out of her way to help them, to encourage them, to advise them, and occasionally to kick them in the pants when she thought they needed to do better. You'll read many of those stories in a beautiful booklet you've received today. As much as she changed the world during her lifetime, she left us a generation of leaders and leaders to be, committed to helping and keeping the fight for democracy, human rights, and dignity for all. And at this perilous moment in world affairs, I am convinced that this will prove to be her most enduring legacy. It's that legacy in the world she shaped that we celebrate today. Madeleine Albright lived the values of our school and was the very essence of Georgetown in so many ways. We're proud to call her our own, and we're blessed by what she gave to us. Now, let us get started with today's program. I've got the pleasure to introduce Edward Luce, the U.S. national editor and columnist at the Financial Times. He will moderate our first conversation of the afternoon with three extraordinary foreign ministers of El Salvador, Israel, and Sweden who work with Madeleine in the forum she ran for ex-ministers at the Aspen Institute, which she loved to call Madeleine and Her Exes. Welcome, Edward Luce and the foreign ministers. Thank you very much.
I'll take this one, so take whichever you want. Wherever works. Thank you so much for that. It's a real, it's a great honor to be moderating a panel at a symposium dedicated to Madeleine Albright. And we will touch upon many of the themes in contemporary manifestation that preoccupied her throughout her life, personally and in public life. I should mention, she, in her final few years, I got to know her quite well as a neighbor here in Georgetown, but also as somebody who, in a way, as a teacher, helped me tremendously with a biography I'm researching on Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was taught, she was one of his students, but he was also the one who gave her her first job in an administration, which was in the Carter administration, as the liaison between the White House and Capitol Hill. And she had been previously working for Ed Muskie, Senator Ed Muskie, Polish-American from the Northeast, and went to work for Zbigniew Brzezinski, a Polish-born American. And she described this as going from pole to pole, from Capitol Hill to the White House. And she was extraordinarily helpful in the research and full of zingers in private as well as in public. Now, I've got a really brilliant panel. Only Madeleine Albright could call them her exes, of people who worked with Madeleine when she was Secretary of State, and then thereafter in the Madeleine Exes group. Starting on my left with Margot Woolstrom, who I believe entered politics in Sweden in the late 70s. You don't look it, but that's quite a long way back. And held many. I thought you were elected in 79, according at the end of the beginning of the 80s, when you were about 5, and held many positions, including Sweden's foreign minister for 5 years. But I believe when Secretary Albright was Secretary of State, you were the EU Commissioner for the Environment, which is a subject we want to get onto today, and then later Vice President of the European Commission. Tzipi Livni, in the middle, is, again, somebody who overlapped with Madeleine Albright. All the great...
She adopted me later.
She adopted you later. But you've held most big jobs, particularly security jobs and foreign policy jobs in Israeli politics. You've been Deputy Prime Minister, you've been Foreign Minister, of course. You led negotiations for 5 years between Israel and the Palestinians. And served in the Israeli Defense Force and Mossad, so I will be very respectful in my questioning. And finally, Mayu, Ávila, who has broken every glass ceiling there is in El Salvador. Again, you were Foreign Minister of the first woman Foreign Minister of El Salvador when Albright was Secretary of State.
She was also the first
And
female
she was also the first, quite
secretary.
Right. America's first female Secretary of State and second ambassador to the UN who was a woman. And you were the first woman in El Salvador, I believe, to head a private sector bank, to be president of. Unlike many people who make it in Central American politics, you still live in El Salvador. And I think that might be relevant later on. So a brilliant panel. Let me start, as I think Secretary Albright would have if she was discussing the state of the world with Ukraine, and not just the situation we've seen in the last few days with the war turning more in Ukraine's direction on the ground, or indeed on Putin's annexation of these four regions in the east and the south after questionable referenda, but also on how the world is dealing with this. And Mayu, if I could, I'd like to actually just start with you on this. In the West, we like to think there's almost complete unity on this question. But if you elevate your altitude a bit and look around the world, there's a lot of nuance in there, and a lot of people who directly vote against Ukraine and the West's position at the United Nations, including El Salvador, which is abstained, not directly voted against, but it's abstained. Now, you have a president who I believe you're probably not a huge fan of, President Bukele, known for having made El Salvador the first ever country to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. We won't get into that, but also as somebody who was actually quite admiring of Putin and was, I believe, due to visit Moscow in June, scheduled before the war began. El Salvador, along with many countries in what we used to call the global south, has abstained on UN votes on this. What is it that either Ukraine in particular, the West in general, is failing to do in terms of making the case that this is existential, if indeed you agree with that?
Thank you so much for the question. And again, thank you to Georgetown and everyone who's here celebrating our friend Madeleine, and to everyone, the most honorable Secretary of State. And in a stage where I'm so happy that the majority that I see are young faces, which she would have been delighted to see this. And so again, thank you for that. And before, if you go a couple of decades, maybe when Madeleine was striving for democracy to be that powerful flag that we would all be aspiring to, has changed so much in Latin America. And that is why you don't see a united Latin America behind a US-specific position or a plight for democracy and liberty. There are many challenges in regards to what was a very successful time, as was described before by Joel. Thank you so much, of everything that Madeleine got rolling, as you can say, in democracy. But inequalities in Latin America, and also the Chinese presence, and the world is no longer, led by the United States. It's now even multipolar. China has the economic and political substance. Russia has the nuclear weapons. They make their presence felt. So the West then, or Latin America, very much looked into their own particular necessities and requirements in each vote that they have given. And so you can see abstaining, or you can even see people joining, what you would call anti-democratic positions. But it is a challenge which lies within the inequalities, but also our challenge to educate and continue to educate our people.
And I mean, most conspicuous there would be Mexico and Brazil, I guess, as two of the largest, Obrador and Bolsonaro. But
and
not alone. And Nicaragua.
Don't forget Nicaragua, where you have a very strong dictatorship, where there is almost no possibility of freedom of expression.
So, I mean, we'll get more into the South and Central American region a bit later, but Tzipi, from a Middle Eastern perspective in general, but Israel in particular, this war has produced some fairly surprising positions, at least surprising to people who may not be as well informed about the Middle East as they should be. People in this town thought Israel would take a much more Western European style position, perhaps not taking into account the cooperation you have with Russia and Syrian airspace, for example. Nevertheless, so you have a tightrope to walk. Nevertheless, Ukraine is a smaller country, it's a democracy. Its president is Jewish. How do you explain Israel's relative modulation and ambivalence on a question that a lot of people expected Israel would see in much sort of broader, starker colors?
Okay. I would like also to reiterate the fact that you were the most important audience, and to Madeleine, she was always speaking about her students and saying that part of who we are is the fact that we also try to engage and work with young people, because this is very important. Speaking about Israel, Russia, and the Russian invasion to the Ukraine, and by the way, I'll try to explain the government policy even though I criticized it in real time in Israel. Yes, usually you can say that diplomacy is finding solutions on the scale between values and interest. I do believe that this time values and interest are on the same side, and this is the side of the United States against Putin. So at first it is clear that Israel has some security interest in Syria because the Syrian soil is being exploited by the Iranians in order to infiltrate and transfer weapons to Hezbollah, which is a terrorist organization that is targeting Israel. So Israel needs to act once in a while, by the way, in accordance also to Security Council resolution that there is an arms embargo on Hezbollah. So Israel is acting militarily by attacking these weapons that is being transferred. Since the Russians are there, so we need to coordinate it with the Russians that are supporting Assad in Syria, but yet enabling Israeli aircraft to attack these weapons. So it's security military coordination which is needed. Of course, I understand that as an Israeli, but taking in consideration not just matter of values, and Israel is part of the free world led by the United States of America. We share the same set of values. We are, and in this case of the invasion to the Ukraine, it's very simple. It's the bad guy against the good guys. This is the situation. But at first, it is true that Israeli leaders try to walk within the drops in the way, to mediate, to find a solution maybe between Zelensky and Putin, but you cannot walk within the drops when it's pouring and raining. And after we saw the horrific pictures and massacres that were made in the Ukraine, so also the Israeli position became very clear. And I also believe that this time, as I said, it's not the choice between values and security, because the relations between Israel and the United States, also from a security perspective, are essential for Israel's security. So this time, I believe that the choice was easy, even though at first it took some days for the Israeli government to discover it.
Okay, I mean, I ought to mention in this context, Madeleine Albright is associated with many things. One of them is brooches, and you're wearing one, which describe what that is.
Yes, this is the American flag and the Ukrainian flag with a dove writing peace. And I got this on my way here, and frankly, usually I don't wear pins. But if there is one event that I should come with a pin, and specifically with this pin, was this event.
I might ask later what an appropriate brooch would be for an event celebrating Madeleine Albright. I do remember she wore a snake when she met Saddam Hussein. I don't know, what did she wear when?
By the way, in the last article, she mentioned that Putin was a crocodile or something, yes, with the cold blood or something like this. Well, it's clear that he cries with crocodile tears, that's for sure.
I'll remember that line. Margot, Swedish perspective is very interesting. At the beginning of this war, people were debating, whether Ukraine should be Finlandized, as in made into a neutral buffer state between Russia and the West. And the whole Finlandization, I know it annoys Finns, your neighbors, but the whole Finlandization debate was very strong at the point. The war's gone so badly for Russia, instead of Finlandizing Ukraine, we've NATOized Finland and Sweden. A position that those who know these particular Nordic countries would have found shockingly surprising even a year ago, even 6 months ago. So you have joined NATO, you are joining NATO, and so NATO is clearly much stronger and more united than was imaginable a year ago because of our reaction to Putin. Yet we are facing a winter in which There's going to be a recession at some point in the EU. There's going to be a continued shortage of gas and other energy supplies, and there might even be rationing. So we're going to get a test of European public support for European unity on this question. Are we going to pass? Is Europe going to pass that test? And I'll get it a little bit more into Swedish politics later, but just more generally from a European perspective, is Europe going to pass this test this winter?
Thank you very much, and fantastic to see all of you students. And you know, we are very often called VIPs, very important people or persons, but you are the real VIPs. You will determine our future. You will shape our future. And I'm so glad to see you all here, and thank you also for everything that you are doing. And if I could choose a brooch, I would choose one that I have at home, if only I had remembered to be that wise, with a big heart, of course, because I think that would symbolize also how I feel about Madeleine and how much I already miss her. And one more thing, remember that it is not a glass ceiling, it's most often a thick layer of men. So to all of you women. So I think that's a formulation that Madeleine would have liked. Now, what I truly believe that maybe this war can be determined in Brussels and by the European Union if we can uphold the sanctions, continue with the sanctions. And already yesterday, the Council decided on another package of sanctions. But as you say, it will also be determined whether we can stick together, whether we can continue to show unity. And to my country, I would say it was a turning point when the Finnish president, Niinistö, stated publicly that for a long time we have been, if not sleeping, so at least living with the bear, with the long, long border that they have against Russia. And I have known personally said that I can call Putin. If we see problems or challenges that we have in common or something that threatens us, I have been able to call him and we could sort it out. This is no longer possible. I cannot trust him. Everything is up in the air, and I cannot count on that kind of contact. And if you cut all the political and diplomatic contacts, it makes it very difficult. So they had decided to join NATO as a member. And remember, it's not that we've been neutral. We have been militarily non-aligned, and that makes the whole difference. And when Finland and the Finnish president said that, we understood that everything has changed also for us. This is the country that we have the deepest security and defense cooperation with. And of course, we would end up in a very strange position in Europe as well, between sort of all our neighbors having joined NATO. It was not an easy decision because we have a long tradition of working for peace and disarmament and against nuclear weapons and all of that. So it took a lot of discussion and debate also within my own party and among the Swedish people. So I think in the end it was the right decision, but I do believe that we also have to continue to form alliances that will look more long-term. What happens? How can we deal with climate change without Russia? With that enormous country that will not disappear, it will still be there. With now methane being released also because the permafrost is melting, we cannot discount Russia in those negotiations. And how will we live with the threat from Russia? But I think it is absolutely crucial that the European Union can show unity, can continue, and can also do everything needed to replace gas from Russia with renewable energy and help each other. So it would be very, very tough, but it could actually also make a difference when it comes to the outcome of this war.
I just want to stick with you for the next question, the next round of questions. We'll start with you. Madeleine Albright's penultimate book was called Fascism, A Warning. And it was partly based on her experience, her childhood, escaping Central Europe, becoming a refugee, but also on her experiences in public life over many decades, and teaching many people in this room that this is a warning that keeps having to be repeated, that we don't, what we learn from history is that we don't learn from history. The war, the invasion of Ukraine, began a few weeks before she died, so she was aware of that, but she didn't see recent elections in Europe. And I'm thinking, in particular, with the context of fascism, a warning that Italy has elected its first right-wing prime minister with fascist origins or fascist connections in Giorgia Meloni and her Brothers of Italy party at the weekend. And of your country, of all places, the moderate, Nordic, Scandic, social democratic Sweden, the far-right party there, the Sweden, slightly misleadingly named Sweden Democrats, came second best in the election and is key to the formation of the new government. How worried should we be about events such as this, or indeed Le Pen coming second again, but a better second than the first time round in the presidential French elections earlier this year? How good are we at accommodating and disarming the far-right populist threat in Europe?
I think it's a banality even to say that we live in perilous times. And it feels as if there are those sort of big tectonic plates starting to move in a way where we don't see where will all of this end. So, but of course, this is politically a very, very serious situation. They mean business. They are in business. Also, these parties. It's not that we can ignore them and say, well, maybe it's not that serious, really. Do they really believe in this? Yes, they do. And they start by changing. In Sweden, they definitely want to change everything with public service, public radio and television. They will want to change our cultural politics. Because they know that that's a way to control what kind of news we get and what we think about what goes on in society. And it's very hard to understand how people also can trust somebody like Meloni in Italy. Even some of the poorest. I saw an interview with a woman who was a single mother living very, very poorly, small apartment and no money. And they asked her, but you will vote for Meloni? Yes, because la donna, la mamma. So apparently she mistrusted every other politician, but had some hope left because this was a woman and that she might represent her. And this is sort of the... I don't know what to call it, and I fear those changes because I think that they will increase the deep inequalities that exist already in society. That's a bad sign for democracy because I feel that those deep inequalities are incompatible with democracy. What happens is that people will feel they never make decisions that favor me, that benefit me. There is an injustice, a deep feeling of injustice in society, and they will choose somebody that come up with simple solutions or give promises that sound nice, but will actually lessen also the trust in institutions and so on. And that's how we start to disravel also democracy and undermine democracy. So I think that it's a very dangerous situation. And in Sweden, it has to do with criminality, with mass shootings, but we've had a lot of shootings in Sweden, and people blame it on immigration and the high number of refugees that we welcome to Sweden. So this is, and of course the Sverigedemokraterna, they blame it on the refugees and the immigrants.
Okay, that's an interesting answer, and it doesn't exhaust the subject, so I will get back to it. I'm going to get to you in a moment, Tzipi. I just want to allow Mayu to pick up on that. We are talking about democracy as a tarnished brand, and the Madeleine Albright view, which ultimately I share, is that populism's magical thinking will eventually discredit itself, and that we will then, as electorates, learn these painful lessons, unnecessarily painful, maybe, but then adjust and move on accordingly. And perhaps, given that my native Britain is going through a particularly painful bout of magical thinking, I believe the pound has been renamed shitcoin, for example. The example is a live one, at least for people like me. But from that global South perspective, I mean, the expectation always was, well, however imperfectly governed Western democracies are, that's the top of the escalator we are on. That's where we're going to. Is that still the case, or is democracy's brand tarnished?
It is definitely tarnished, and the other most important part that you have already stated a bit also, Margot, is populism. But in Latin America, populism is not bound to any type of political extreme. It's not that the left carries a banner of populism or that the right. They do it methodically, both, whoever, candidates without any ideology, and they ride on democracy to get the votes. And as you state, with Madeleine, we would always dream that, populists would not have the capacity or the ability to render on all the promises. But many times, countries or the people in the countries are so desperate that with one promise that is, complied with, they will continue to give the vote. So populism, either left or right, again, I say in Latin America, you see it, the left winning in Chile, but you have a populism in Venezuela that swept, the country into having more than 5 million refugees all over the world leaving their country because of the lack of opportunities. And then you have the far right in also Bolsonaro in Brazil, who is also riding on populism. So the difficulty that in Latin America is that if you find the inequalities, you find the lack of opportunities and the insecurity, which is also very important. We have to, and it's a theme that it's difficult to touch upon. It's drugs, drug dealing. For example, Central America, we are 5 countries, 6 with Panama. We don't produce drugs, but we are the pathway. Pathway from where? From where it's produced to where it's consumed. So the US also has a responsibility in being able to tackle, the amount of money that passes through these countries produces more corruption, again, fosters populism, because there's many politicians who run with this money, and they accompany this magic wand that they think that they will be able to, have the practical solution. So I do believe we have to continue fighting for democracy. We have to continue fighting for the people's possibility to render their opinion, but we have to educate them. And one last word on that. The upskill for us is something that Madeleine also brought to the table for the excess, is misinformation, is the capacity that now everyone has of going on the web and getting the information they want. So it's this handling of misinformation that in Latin America is definitely pushing populism even in a stronger way and lesser of the possibilities of democracy.
Thank you. Tzipi, I can't resist asking you, since we're talking about populism, about one of the great pioneers of modern populism, Benjamin Netanyahu, who really did devise a lot.
We should not give him any credit, not even for this.
Not even that.
Not even that.
Okay. I mean, I have to say, when I heard, in one of your recent elections, I know you've had a lot of elections recently, your batting average is high, but in an election that occurred when Obama was still president, so 15 or 16 elections ago in Israel, where George Soros was demonized as the face of globalism, was indistinguishable to me from how Orban would present. Now, that's sort of at the most demagogic level, but in terms of the skill of managing resentments in order to stay in power and making them more about ethnic resentments than about economics, I do think it's fair to say Bibi is a pioneer. Is that right? And have we seen the last of him or not seen the last of him?
Well, we'll know in a month. November 1st, we are having 5th round of election in the last 3 years. A few words about the global situation, and then I will relate. I will not escape from speaking about the situation in Israel. But I think that my first meetings with Madeleine were about worrying together when we saw where the trends are. And we also drafted and published later principles for democracy, how democracies can defend themselves in understanding what are the problems and what need to be done. In a way, in going back to stage one, to understand that democracy is a matter of values. And we were thinking, in a way, how to rebrand it to young people, because for them it's the obvious. I mean, they were born, most of them, in democracy. They feel, disconnected to the establishment and looking for new ideas. And therefore, we were thinking how to create it as an all-new vision that young people will feel connected to, not that, the old guide represent these kind of things and we need to support authoritarian, populistic leader instead. It's clear that the atmosphere is that there's a clash between globalization and a nation state. And I can understand why, because globalization that was a real promise at the beginning, lots of people were left behind, worried about their family, about their work, about their children. And in a way, the feeling is that the nation state is the opposite part. I would suggest something that I call it globalination. It means that being part of a nation state, believing in your own country, being a patriot, it's fine, as long it doesn't turn into nationalism in a manner that you do not respect the other or the rights of minorities within your own country. And therefore, being proud of your country means that not your country is amongst the other or superior to the others, but because your country is part of an alliance or part of the free world supporting the same set of values. So when Madeleine was speaking about alliances and the transatlantic alliance and the creation of new institutions that were created after the horrified situation of the Second World War, it was about not just political alliances, but based on the same set of values, and which is democracy. Speaking about Israel, and yes, I am the historical opponent for Netanyahu. I also beat him in elections once, but I got the popular vote, but he took office, like happened to another female that you're going to meet later. But what's happening in Israel, and this is connected also to what happened in the United States, It's quite easy in a country that, we are surrounded by enemies. We have an open conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, and within Israel, we are having 20% of Israeli equal rights Arab citizens, but it's quite clear to connect these citizens to the Palestinians, which are not Israeli citizens. Don't want to bother you with this, but it's quite easy to populistic leaders, not only populistic, but also fascist leaders, to abuse this sense of fear from terror and to find enemies that at first were the enemies outside of Israel and later were described as the enemies inside Israel. So in a way, when Netanyahu said in elections in 2015 that the Arabs are coming to the polls
that was it.
in buses that left wing is organizing and financed by the EU. So altogether in the same sentence, it was not against the Arabs, it was against me, basically. Center-left, believing in the idea of solving the conflict with the Palestinians, reaching peace with the Palestinians. So we were portrayed as traitors, as collaborators, as representing the Palestinian cause and not the Israeli cause. And he succeeded in doing so. And frankly, what happened also connected to the situation in the US, because, as I said before, the relations between Israel and the United States are of a strategic importance for any Israeli leader. But something happened in the United States. And when Trump was elected, when the president of the United States is crossing a red line of democracy, is attacking the democratic institution, this red line doesn't exist anymore in the entire free world. So Netanyahu, I saw the same tweets in English and in Hebrew. So for many years, when an Israeli leader took some steps, we can get a phone call from the White House saying, hey, hello, next visit you are going to speak about shared values, so please beware. But now the message was completely the opposite.
Like, more, please.
And he learned that it pays politically, that it's worth it. So, and therefore this is what is happening in Israel. I do hope that in November 1st, the Israeli will send a completely different message. But let's see. I'm still hopeful.
So I'm conscious of the time. That we're finishing at 1:30, but I want there'll be about 15, 20 minutes for questions. I'm not sure. I'm going to ask another round here, but I'm not sure. There will be a mic at the back, so to ask, if you want to ask a question, go and line up behind that mic, not at the back. It's coming rapidly towards me. It's almost at the front now. In about 5 minutes. Mayu, let me just stick with you. We'll go back to you. Another theme deeply close to Madeleine Albright's heart was refugees. She was a refugee. She was also an immigrant and a naturalized citizen of the United States. The greatest source of refugees and of immigrants to this country is from your part of the world, and the rather sort of ominously named Northern Triangle that you live in. And I know that new factors like climate change are creating climate refugees as well. Now, there are two sides to this coin. One is the deep tragedy of a lot of disempowered people in places like Central America and Sub-Saharan Africa. And two is the impact on populism in the north, where a lot of them move to. How do we think about addressing and solving this question?
I was very fortunate that one of our very last actions together with Madeleine was at the World Refugee Council level 2 years ago, together with Lloyd Axworthy, who was another former Foreign Minister of Canada, good friend also with Madeleine. So we set up and we were co-chairs of this effort to bring about a deeper understanding, where many from Georgetown also participated, on what could be potential solutions or how to visualize migration throughout Latin America. It's mostly, if you take numbers, it's mostly Mexicans, then come from north part of Central America. So what you're looking at is not only the push that comes from the countries that, because of poverty, because of insecurity, because of also climate change, you saw that we had back-to-back hurricanes that hit Honduras, Nicaragua, Guatemala, and Salvador. 2 days after, almost, a caravan of 9,000 people was instantly formed in San Pedro Sula to walk all the way to the southern border. So climate change is a definite actor, not only because of rain, because also of drought. So you have push factors, but you also have pull factors of migration. And that is the need. I visit the United States and I'm walking and I see a sign enormous in McDonald's that says $12 an hour. And then another one was even, pushing higher. Another one, $20 an hour and we'll give you a bonus to sign in. So the lure, the necessity that exists in developed countries for work, health workers, people to take care of the elderly, there is also a pull. So with Madeleine and Lloyd, what we said is we need to find a balance to open up more legal ways. People don't want to leave their country. If there could be semi-permanent solutions, that is timed workers that come for specific times and they keep their families back home and be able to send also the remittances. So visualizing a more needed dialogue to better understand the push and the pull, so as to also consider the humanitarian aid that is needed for people who are in transit and when they arrive at their destination for integration into the country or for the possibility, as I say, of contributing to that economy.
So, I'm thinking here of somebody else who's broken a glass ceiling or the, what was the phrase you had?
Thick layer of men.
Thick layer of men. Thick layer of men, which is a Madeleine-esque zinger. I think you win the prize so far. Kamala Harris, the first female vice president, this is one of her briefs as vice president. But it's very, very difficult, even with the resources and power of the United States, to influence governance in another country. And even if you occupy it militarily, like Afghanistan, it doesn't seem to work. So how can the West help people not need to migrate, to have enough security at home so that this becomes less of a problem for you losing people and America dealing with the populist Trump border wall over and over again? How does a country like America help? What's the most practical way?
And that again is what brought us to the need for this dialogue, but also for cooperation. And cooperation does not only mean, handing out dollars. That does not work. It's the capacity to build joint alliances economically, and you have the free trade agreement with Central America, which has fostered hundreds of thousands of jobs, good paying jobs, and people stay in the countries because they find that path. So it's the possibility of opening up more opportunities through economic development, but mostly considering sustainable economic development because of the vulnerability of Central America, where we contribute less than 0.3% of carbon emissions to the world, and we are one of the most vulnerable areas in the whole world in regards to climate change.
Margot, sorry, I know you were going to speak.
I have to make things worse or describe them in even harsher terms because we've only seen the beginning of climate refugees. And as we noticed last week, 1/3 of Pakistan's, the whole country of Pakistan is underwater. And we know from the IPCC that this is just the beginning of more of these extreme weather conditions, storms and floods, and you are experiencing that also in the US right now. And So we will see millions and millions of people having to leave their countries because of climate change. So we'd better buckle up, or what do you say, to prepare for that. And I think we need to share a responsibility, and we need to do more to be able to prevent this from becoming even worse. And I think the European Union, we saw that in 2015 also with all the Syrian refugees, that a few countries refused to take on any refugees, and others did the opposite. So this is really a task for us. But of course, development aid is also extremely important, and the cooperation, as you say, Mayu, this is necessary.
So one of the things about warnings, and Madeleine Albright knew this as well as anybody, is it's one thing making a warning, it's another thing people acting on that warning. And we have a lot of warnings, all very plausible, not far-fetched warnings about the next pandemic, about the impact of climate change, the real time that we can see in places like Pakistan, the Gulf, and of course the refugee situation that you were just discussing, Mayu. Global institutions have got to be a part of this, acting bodies like the WHO, UNHCR, etc., have got to be a part of this. But they're only as strong as we allow them to be. So what, in an era of great power politics, and then I'm going to go to questions, but I want each of you briefly to answer, in an era where there's a lot more geopolitical action going on, shall we put it, and jostling between great powers, and the United States not being any longer the undisputed, indispensable nation that stands taller than others, as Madeleine Albright described it. How do we develop or strengthen these institutions? And I'll ask each of you sort of briefly to give, but starting with Margot and then Tzipi. Margot.
Well, we have to reform, for example, the United Nations. I mean, we have to stop the use of the veto in the way that we've seen happening lately. We have to make sure that our sort of interinstitutional that the cooperation is also developed. We have to do more within the European Union to become effective and also reflect what the peoples of the European Union want. So there are a number of reforms necessary to demonstrate that we are serious about tackling these problems together. And I think we have to redefine security. I think we need to come back to what was once coined as common security, to understand that this has to cover also the political and diplomatic areas. We have to invest in that to be able to continue to make decisions together. And Madeleine always asked us when we met, also via Zoom, for example, she would say, all right, guys, what have you been doing since I last saw you? So she would always instill that sort of responsibility in us to take action as well, work through our networks and try to introduce reforms or changes in society, and I think it's a good thing.
By the way, if I don't see people lining up behind that microphone, I'm going to do what I'm told Madeleine Albright did in her classes, which is just randomly call on one of them. So you can preempt that terrifying scenario by thinking, Tzipi.
Okay, speaking about climate change and the international institutions, frankly, the international institutions are not functioning. I mean, there was an attempt to have a resolution of the United Nations Security Council about climate change and conflicts, how climate change is going to change or to create new conflicts in the world. And it was vetoed by Russia and China, or both of them. And this is what we are facing these days. And I believe, and this is something that I had a conversation after the COP in Glasgow, a gathering of the international community trying to have new understandings and that leaders will sign what is needed. And I saw, the leaders speaking there on stages, and young people took the streets against them. But those that were in the room were the good guys. I mean, they are trying to do their best. Mm-hmm. And I think that what can be done is maybe to speak to, when I joined politics, I joined politics because I was thinking, what am I leaving to my children? What kind of country, of a state am I leaving to my children? And now I'm thinking, what kind of a world, of a globe am I leaving? And it is clear that this is the responsibility of our generation, but we are not doing enough. I mean, we, not those sitting on the stage, and there's a need for international cooperation. It's not just part of the world that can deal with it. So maybe we can work together in order to show and that people would understand that there's a political price for not doing the right thing and making the right decisions in your own country. And to share this information with young people, with voters, and maybe they will be more effective than others, not just the international institutions. But last thing that is also connected to the fact that we are all women here, and it's clear that, and I think that it shows also during pandemic that women are making better decisions. So it's time to turn from Me Too into Me Too in power.
And that was the point I wanted to make very slow. If you remember, one of Madeleine's quotes is, promoting women is not only the right thing, it's the smart thing. And so you want to change institutions, get more women elected.
Even in Italy?
Try women.
Sorry. Forgive me. Now, be careful what you wish for. You might actually get it. Are we allowed a little bit more than 10 minutes for questions? I don't know who. Okay. So we do have to, I don't have to ask you to ask them at the same time. But if you can make them, say who you are, and then make the question like a single statement, sentence, not statement.
Okay. Hello. So my name's Elsa. I'm a first-year student at the McCourt School. And I was just wondering, are there any failures that you've experienced that you would feel comfortable sharing with future women diplomats and policymakers in the room?
How long do we have? Failures.
Margot, why don't you answer?
No, but
well,
of course there are.
I mean, I'm not saying you in particular.
Thank you.
Be qualified to answer that.
Thank you. Of course, there are failures. We wouldn't be human if we couldn't also experience failures. And what I think is valid for you, the generation that you are, you will need a lot of courage. I think you will have to be courageous and you will have to follow and create a kind of inner compass of understanding what is right and wrong. Because studying those people who are role models or heroes to us, one thing they had in common is that they are guided by that kind of inner compass, knowing that I will have to do this even though it's difficult. So you will have to, and it needs some courage, but you also need to be patient. Not too patient, because climate change requires us to do, but of course there are, I don't know what exactly we could bring up, but I think it is when you are not kind to other people, when you've been too stressed out to really listen carefully, or to not try cooperation first and to sort of get the best out of people. I think that is failure to me. So maybe others, do you want to share failures?
It's amazing because when you were speaking about inner compass, I discovered during my time in politics that usually when we work together with other women in leadership, they work according to an inner compass. Now, I failed to form a government in Israel. It was almost there, I failed. But it's easy, maybe not easier, but I can live with the outcome if and when I acted in accordance to my own inner compass and not listening to an advisor, believing that he knows, usually the advisors are knows what to do better. So I prefer to live with my own mistakes, knowing that I did, maybe it's not the right outcome, but I worked in according to my own set of values and not just listening to some wonderful political advices.
A very difficult step for me was when I got immersed in what I was doing, and I forgot my family. I forgot the people who really were there for me, my children, my husband. And so My failure was that my priorities were not aligned. And when I spoke with Madeleine, and I remember I had the opportunity to condecorate her here at the OAS, and she was wearing a medal that we had given her, and she did not take it off. And I said, Madeleine, you're gonna go show off at the office? No, she said, I'm going back home for my grandkids, and I know her sister is here. And how lovely it was to have a friend like her bring me back to what the priority should be, and getting that balance.
Thank you. Please.
Hi, my name is Rachel Gurvich, and I'm a first-year student in the School of Foreign Service. And my question is, with the issues that you discussed today, like climate change and like the war in Russia and Ukraine, how can diplomats create solutions when our political landscape is becoming so increasingly polarized?
Excellent question. And what I'm going to do is to impose I won't say fascist rule, but it's going to be the wrong word, but a strict rule here that one answer per question, because there's a lot of people to ask questions. Who would like to answer that very, very good question? The political constraints on diplomats. Margot?
No, I think, there is this saying, vinci pacem, pax bellum, that if you want peace, you need to prepare for war. But I think it's also the opposite. If you want peace, you have to prepare for peace. You have to invest more in the political and diplomatic contacts. And I think we have not discussed what will happen after, when there is some kind of peace also in Ukraine. What happens then? How are we supposed to engage with both Russia and Ukraine from now on? What are the alternatives? And so I think we have maybe got stuck in our own sort of national and nationalistic views on things, instead of thinking how we can do more by actually cooperating or promoting multilateralism. So invest in those things, open more embassies, try to create new forums and platforms for discussion.
Thank you. The next person.
Hello, my name is Kirill Mironenko. I'm a first-year student at the School of Foreign Service, and I'm from Ukraine. And when talking about the war, you have mentioned the necessity for President Zelensky to talk with Putin. And since my country's objective for this war is clear, to regain all the territory that has been lost because of the invasion, I'm just wondering whether you think this potential talk is going to be fruitful at all. And maybe the only way for us to actually win and finish the war would be the battlefront win. And apart from that, given all the blackmailing of nuclear weapon use, I'm just curious how can the world community can force Putin and the Kremlin to stop all the blackmailing and violation of all the war rules?
Tzipi.
I'm sorry, I cannot hear.
What should be the position from Ukraine? Speaking with a dialogue with Putin or the battlefront?
Well, frankly, I keep thinking since the invasion started, if there was something that could have been done before the invasion. Because speaking about it, I was in 2007, yes, I'm that old, in Munich Security Conference where Putin was there, and we were all listening there, and he was speaking about not accepting the role of the United States in the world, speaking about NATO, not accepting NATO. It was there on the table. And for many years, the international community didn't really absorb it or try to do something about it. And then we had the invasion to Georgia and later to Crimea. And even the days before the invasion, I was thinking maybe there's an outcome like a NATO for EU. That the Ukraine will join EU and will not join NATO. But it was, frankly, nothing was really done before the invasion. And now my feeling is that, I don't see a real solution to the situation now.
But to the nuclear, nuclear dimension of the blackmail?
So you know what? I think that we should think even before the nuke stuff. It's horrific enough, the situation there. It was made clear by the US that nuke will not be acceptable and will be answered, and I support it. I think that Putin had, the miscalculation of the era, because he was looking also at the US, and after President Obama said that if Assad will use weapon against his own people, chemical weapon against his own people, it will be a red line that he shouldn't cross, but nothing was done. And Putin was looking at Europe that was divided. And I think that he made this miscalculation, and right now, it's a moment in which he needs to understand that the messages coming from the US are serious, and the United States president means it.
Margot, I think
the world cannot talk to Putin. That it takes us nowhere. We have to keep the pressure up, like the European Union and all other countries, and economic, sort of social, political pressure, and we have to help Ukraine win. And I mean militarily, sort of on the battlefield. Unfortunately, that's where we are. But let's face it also, the whole nuclear issue, this changes our views on how useful the nuclear deterrence is. Are we willing to sacrifice the people of Ukraine to test whether his threat is real or not? Of course we should not. And we just have to sort of keep the pressure on. And now it's not a time to try to talk to Putin.
But there is a nuclear deterrence. We know that.
But the reason
the United States is not involved. Supporting, yes, but not involved because of the Russian nuclear deterrence. This is the truth.
Well, let's. This is a long discussion, but I do believe the world will have to rethink the nuclear deterrence, because now also the rhetoric about nuclear weapons is changing. Now we're talking about it not as a deterrence, but as a useful, tactical sort of weapon that we can actually use in the battlefield, a small nuclear weapon as it is called. Do you understand the devastation that this will bring to this world? And do we accept that this is something that will affect all of the innocent people?
We can all agree that the world should help Ukraine to win.
We have to help Ukraine to win, but without nuclear weapons. We should never use nuclear weapons. But you are a representative here of the most courageous people, the most fantastic people that we have.
So I'm aware that we were given a 10-minute extension, but we only have 7 minutes left of it. So the next question, thank you for that question and the mini debate you've started.
Good afternoon. My name is Cherry. I'm a first year here in the MSS program. So in remembering Secretary of State Albright, one thing that really stands out is that she always drew on her role as a woman as a strength in the room. Some who saw it as a weakness, she saw it as a unique advantage. So here today we have 3 wonderful foreign ministers who are also wonderful women. So I was just interested in knowing if there was ever a situation in your work where being a woman provided you a unique advantage, and you were able to draw on that in your work.
Mayu.
It was the very first time I was in the United Nations, 1999, and Madeleine was also there. Unfortunately, she was not with me on my very first meeting, which was a separate meeting where we were only 9 women foreign ministers in the world. So that meeting, you can imagine, was full of men, completely full of men. There was no one else but myself as a woman. So we didn't start the meeting because there was someone who was late, a man was late, and we couldn't start without him. So when he came in, I kind of didn't speak. I just went like this, like saying, sit down, let's start, I thought I was saying that. He just turned around and he looked at me and he said, "Coffee with milk." Because what was a woman doing there, in that very important meeting, must be the waitress. So, what did I do? I went to the back table where there was fresh coffee. I served him his coffee with milk. I placed it, but I sat right beside him. And I took my place, and I made my point of my voice being heard, which was another Madeleine always recommendation, make yourself heard.
when running for office, yes, of course, I had also, I was being questioned, who's going to answer the phone 3 a.m.? Usually people are not against a woman answering the phone, but they expect her to say, yes, just a minute, I'm giving you the prime minister. And I was in the Israeli Security Cabinet in times of wars and military operation, peace talks as well. And I discovered personally that I can share ideas in a broader angle than just military perspective. And security means more than just military aspects. It's broader than there. And when you are not one-track minded, like, yes, just military solution, and you bring to the table also other aspects and thoughts and thinking outside of the box, it contributes to your country's security. And therefore, I believe that women can bring to the table, we should and can break this perception that, that generals or veteran generals that are coming to politics can contribute more to security. It's not. It's, excuse me, but bullshit. We can contribute more.
Yeah,
please,
can I just,
sorry.
No, just to add to this, because I introduced something that we call the Feminist Foreign Policy in Sweden, and we are more than 10 countries who now pursue a feminist foreign policy, meaning that more women, as Tzipi just said, more women means more peace, so that those peace agreements that have women signing, they last longer. More options are brought on the table, and women are also peacekeepers in every way. But I do remember that when I was a commissioner, very often there would come lobby groups to lobby me, on different interests. And once I asked, because it was an all-male delegation again, and I asked these representatives from that organization, so are there no women in your organization, or do you really represent all of it? And then he looked kind of puzzled, and then he said, we can bring our wives next time. Thank you, that would probably have improved the situation considerably, but that was not what I meant. So there are all kinds of, I think we are full of stories of this kind, but maybe these days, a woman would have poured the coffee over him or tried to do something else. So more power to women.
See how women are taking the streets in Iran.
Yeah,
this is something so inspiring.
And in Afghanistan as
and
well.
In Afghanistan.
They're fighting.
Yeah.
Correct.
Unfortunately, there's probably only time left for, there's 1 minute left. And so if it could be a staccato question with staccato answers.
Sure. Hi, my name is Harnoor. I'm a first year in the SFS. And my question was regarding the increased dialogue. So in your years of experience, is there something effective or particularly ineffective that you've seen in increasing actionable dialogue, not just dialogue between developed and developing countries?
I'm sorry, I cannot do
If I may, to make a sense of the minute, it is important in a dialogue that you learn to listen. That when you sit down at the table, you're not only wanting to be heard, speaking out, is that you have the capacity of actively listening.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last sentence.
Sorry, the last sentence of your question?
Oh, sorry, I can totally repeat it. Is there something particularly effective or ineffective that you've seen in helping increase not just dialogue, but actionable dialogue between countries?
Actionable dialogue that results in
I think
things
Mayu
being
said
done.
it. I think Mayu said it. It's a matter of you have to mobilize a political will. You have to know that there is a political will. You have to both speak but also listen and to try to reach out to each other. And the concrete changes, I think, are necessary.
I think that mostly when we are there in decision-making room, it's about making a change and not about our own ego. And I think that this is a major difference between men and women in power. We are thinking about solutions, about listening, about how to solve this problem, while sometimes men are more about who's going to win this.
So I love this definition, Mayu, of a dialogue is not a monologue. It's sometimes the simplest definitions are the ones that get forgotten. And it's a very, very good principle that Madeleine Albright lived by and that I think you all have in your careers, but also on the stage today. So thank you very much indeed. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.